Hello, today we're going to talk a little bit about Ludwig van Beethoven, the great German composer, and then we're going to learn about the first of the great forms, sonata form. Let's start with Beethoven. First of all, how do we pronounce his name? His last name is spelled Beethoven. Looks like Beethoven. And in fact, I lived on a street called Beethoven Street in Binghamton, New York. That's exactly how they pronounced it. But it's actually a Dutch word, and then a German word after that. Beethoven, the TH is a T sound. Beethoven is how we say it in America. In Germany, it would actually be Beethoven, but we don't care about that. His first name, Ludwig, we can call him Ludwig, or we can use the German pronunciation, Ludwig, the W becomes a V. And his middle name is van, Ludwig van Beethoven. In German, again, we pronounce that as an F, Ludwig van Beethoven. But don't worry about that, Ludwig van Beethoven, and you'll be just fine. And that van is because Beethoven's family claimed to have noble origins. When you see a V-O-N or V-A-N, that means they're nobility. It turns out Beethoven was probably not nobility, but he believed he was. He believed it was a Dutch nobility from some generations back. Anyway, Beethoven's born in the city of Bonn, Germany. So this is one of the city-states that makes up the Holy Roman Empire. And he's born in 1770, dies in 1827 at 56 years old. And it's a very sad life. First of all, his death, we don't know what he died from, or from what he died. It seems to have lead poisoning. They took some samples of his hair, very high amounts of lead. And that's not a surprise. Pipes were just coming in for running water, and these were leaded pipes. So people got a lot of lead in these pipes. There's also lead from pewter mugs. But he also drank a lot of wine, and he preferred a cheap, sweet wine. And they put some salts in there to make it appear sweet, and the salts had lead. They were a lead compound. So he was drinking lead all the time. And that may have been what caused his death. But there's also thought that his death was the result of alcoholism. His alcoholism ran in his family, and his liver showed a lot of damage at the autopsy, and it may have been cirrhosis of the liver. He also, just before he got sick, was riding on the outside of a carriage in freezing cold, rainy weather, and it could have been a pneumonia that eventually killed him. We just don't know. But the life was very hard. So he's born to this musical family. His grandfather was quite a famous musician. His father was kind of a mediocre musician. But what was happening at that time is in Vienna, Wolfgang Mozart was this child prodigy. At the age of 5, he was already playing on tour, played for kings and queens all over Europe. The Mozart family did quite well on the backs of this little boy. And so Beethoven's father decided that Beethoven would be the next Mozart. He had the talent to be. So they made him practice hours and hours, and they beat him to make him practice. There's stories of him standing by the piano, tears pouring down his eyes, this poor abused child. But he practiced and practiced, being quite a good pianist and quite a skilled composer, but a very tragic upbringing. And in addition to that, his father was an alcoholic and was quite an embarrassment as well as being violent. And so Beethoven grew up in this very hard environment. But he goes to Vienna, he meets Mozart, he meets Haydn, he establishes himself as a great pianist. Let me tell you what pianists did back then. They didn't just play pieces that they were given. They would be given a tune, and they had to improvise variations. And the variations had to be interesting and original, and at the same time, technically difficult on the piano to show off. And Beethoven would improvise for an hour or so at a time. One time he finished an improvisation that was so good, one of the audience members says, "Too bad you didn't write that down. It's a fantastic variation." So Beethoven sat down and played the entire variation from memory. He remembered every note of the hour-long composition. At least that's the legend. So he was really a great pianist, a great musical mind, and of course one of the great composers. And he was recognized for that. He was very well received in Vienna. Became very famous. But his tragedy was not over. By the age of 20, he started to lose his hearing. This is a man who all he did was play piano. All he did was compose. Music was his life. He started to lose his hearing. By the end of his life, he's completely deaf. Didn't stop him from composing. Didn't stop him till very late in life from playing piano. Didn't even stop him from conducting. But he could not hear. He just heard it all in his head. It's really quite remarkable. He also had other tragedies. There was a battle for the custody of his nephew, and then his nephew attempts suicide. There's just a lot of tragedy in his life. So it's not a surprise that Beethoven was a little weird. He was probably more than a little weird, and there's been a lot of speculation what syndrome he had. But he would burst into rage at really no provocation. Very angry man. He was very odd. Even from a young age, he was seen as odd. Not didn't have any social graces at all. He grew up at court, so you'd think he would have them, but he really didn't. He also didn't bathe. He didn't comb his hair. He was once mistaken for a derelict, and it took his friends to convince the police this is the famous Beethoven because they wouldn't believe it. Um, a very odd man. At the same time, he was a man who believed in the equality of everyone, and he actually spent a lot of his time fighting on behalf of his fellow man. So it's a little strange how this recluse could also be so loving, at least in concept, to his fellow men. And then, so this is the story of Beethoven. During his lifetime, what he really saw was the same things that Schiller saw. He was about 11 years younger, so one generation later, but he still witnessed the American Revolution, the French Revolution, then the taking away of the French Revolution when the Directorate stole that revolution. We'll talk about that in another lecture. Then the rise of Napoleon, first to bring back democracy, and then when he became the emperor, the wars throughout Europe, the Napoleonic Wars that even involved the United States. We call it the War of 1812, but it's part of the Napoleonic Wars. He lived through all of that. So he was all the things that Schiller saw, but he just saw them a little later and went a little deeper into time. So this is the Beethoven that we're going to get to know. Now, what we need to talk about is this form called sonata form. So in the classical era, starting say Mozart, about 100 years before Beethoven, 50 years before Beethoven, there's this desire to be like the classicists, the Greeks, and they wanted things in proportion. So forms begin to develop to try and structure music in a really nice way. And the biggest sonata form. And I'm going to try to explain it to you, but you'll do better looking first at the PowerPoint and then following the listening maps as you listen to the pieces. You cannot listen to a piece and hear the sonata form unless you have years of experience. Really, it's very, very hard to do. But if you follow it in the map and understand what the composer was going for, you see the relationship that the composer has to form, whether he's playing with it, ignoring it, embracing it. And that tells us whether he sees the world in a rational, classical way or an irrational, romantic way. So here's what happened. There were these dances. And the dances had a form very much like pop songs have. Pop songs, when I was growing up, not so much so much today, is you have a verse, and then you do the second verse, and then you have a bridge, and then you bring back the verse. Like, somewhere over the rainbow, that's the verse. And that comes in twice. Da 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 da. Twice. And then you have a bridge. Da dee da 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 dee da 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 dee da da da. A bridge. And then finally the ba ba ba. It comes back again. A B A. A is the first theme. We do it twice. B, second theme. And then the first theme comes back. And we don't always write A. Sometimes we have this strange notation, but you'll see it in the PowerPoint. So I want you to see it. You have two lines, a thick line and a thin line, then two dots. And then later on, two dots, a thin line and a thick line. And everything between those symbols gets played twice. So if you have those lines and A, and those lines is A, and then we play A again. Now, in the olden days, they used the same form, but they used it as a dance form. Minuets and gavottes and all these old-fashioned dances, jigs, were done this way. So you had a theme, and you repeated the theme, and then you had a new theme, a bridge, a B section, then you brought back part of the first theme. Sometimes you repeated that too. Sometimes you didn't. So it's A, B, A, sometimes with a B, A. Music was all like that. Symphonies were like that. And then the idea came that we wanted to have pieces that were longer. These things were 2 minutes long. How do you make a piece that's 5 minutes or 10 or 15 minutes long? Well, instead of having an A, which is a theme, why not have three themes? Ooh, have three groups of themes. So you can have as many themes as you want. A group of themes, another group of themes, another group of themes. And we do all those themes as your A, and we give it a name. We call it the exposition, because that's where the themes get exposed. So we're exposing the themes, the exposition. And just like the original form, we play it, and then we play it a second time. There's a repeat. Well, now you come to what would be B. But we don't need more themes. We've got tons of themes. So what we do for B is we do what's called a development section. We take all those themes and we break them up and we play with them. So a theme that's going up now goes down or backwards, or we take just 3 notes of it or 5 notes of it. And then we do things, we change keys, we do weird things with it. We break it apart and develop it. And so that section is called the development because we develop the themes. That's just where the person's playing. It's almost like the old improvisations. Composers just playing, there's nothing going on. Eventually, after the composer's done playing, we bring back the first themes. because that's how you wrap it up. And because we're recapping what came before, it's called the recapitulation. So it's an exposition, our themes, we repeat that, then development, we break them apart, and then the recapitulation, we recap our themes. Now, composers usually added two things, or could add two additional things. They might put an introduction in. The introduction is a slow thing at the beginning, sets the mood. It usually has nothing to do with the rest of the movement, but we have a slow introduction. And then they stick something at the end that they call coda. Coda is the Italian word for tail, and the tail is stuck on the end of the animal. So when you stick something on the end, it's called a coda. So they have, after the themes come back, after the recapitulation's done, there may be some coda, some music to conclude it. So that's sonata form. Now remember, you're not going to be able to hear a piece and you're, oh, there's theme A, and there's the second theme, and there's the third theme group, and now we're in the development. But when you have a listening map, I'll show you each of those things, and you'll get a sense of it. Oh, I can see that's a development. That's music built on an earlier theme. Oh, that's just like the opening. That's the recapitulation.